Today we are going to take on the subject of what is an expedition yacht versus a traditional yacht, as it's called in some publications, or a white yacht, as we generally refer to them in the industry. White yachts being built normally by yacht companies that only build yachts. We're going to get into the distinction of who the expedition yacht builders are and what type of yachts they are versus the white yachts and what those attributes are. So as a distinction right off the bat, I want to say that any yacht video or yacht description that you've seen that refers to a yacht as being sumptuous is probably not an expedition yacht. It's probably a yacht that is happiest in a marina. These boats live more than 90% of their life in a marina, probably a lot of them 98 or 99%. They don't go out in weather, and they don't go very far from a gas tank, electric line, or a cable TV hookup. The word sumptuous, just in case you were wondering, because it gets bandied about a lot, comes from the French word somptueux, and also from the Latin word sumptuosus, which means expenditure. And it boils down to simply being something that is produced at great cost. It's very expensive. And apparently that is one of the benchmarks for luxury yachts, is that they have to be very expensive. Doesn't really speak to their capabilities at all. So I'm going to get into that. I'm just going to review the history of seaborne expeditions here a little bit, if you'll indulge me, and then we'll get into specific examples of vessels. So let's first establish a criteria of cruising versus expedition. Cruising on a boat is basically messing about locally, whereas an expedition is a voyage undertaken usually by a group of people with a purpose, especially that of exploration or scientific research. To that we could add searching for sunken treasure or a particular wreck, or finding the perfect place to heliski, or like these adventurers looking for an ice wall climb on a nice iceberg, which turned out to be a little trickier than it looked. And in terms of a vessel, whether it's Huck Finn and Jim floating on a raft down the Mississippi, or Thor Heyerdahl crossing the Pacific Ocean on the balsa raft Kon-Tiki, or the Vikings setting off to conquer new lands all across the globe, choosing the right vessel for the voyage and for the mission is essential. Now here's a interesting circumnavigation route. In fact, this is the route of the first circumnavigation. The year was 1519. Ferdinand Magellan left Spain with 5 of these ships and 260 men. To put things in perspective, Magellan's flagship was 65 feet long. That is approximately the same length as the Hinckley tender aboard the late Paul Allen's expedition yacht Octopus. Although he dressed for success, Magellan was killed in a fight with islanders in the Philippines 2 years after leaving on his voyage. And in fact, the first man to circumnavigate the globe was a Malaysian interpreter who he had on board the ships. Of the 260 men who left on the voyage, only 18 made it back to Spain. And when they arrived on a single ship, they were described as looking starved and filthy. This is not the kind of outcome that we would want on an expedition. Fast forward 300 years, and Charles Darwin planned this circumnavigation for scientific research purposes. And today's yachtsman should take note of his preparations and his choice of vessel. It's very interesting. Beagle was built as one of a series of 100 vessels by the Royal Navy in the Cherokee class. She was a 10-gun brig sloop. We'll do another quick size check. The HMS Beagle was 88 feet long with a 23-foot beam, approximately the same size as this zippy little Riva 88. The Riva offers 8 berths for passengers, while the Beagle offers 74 berths. The Riva's 2,600 horsepower will take you 340 nautical miles on a tank, where the wind power available to the Beagle will take you 40,000 miles around the Earth. Upon delivery, he immediately took her to the Devonport shipyard for an extensive rebuilding and refitting for his mission. This is the same Devonport shipyard that today builds state-of-the-art Royal Navy warships and also mega yachts for designers such as Andrew Winch. It's worth noting in Darwin's GA for this vessel that the captain's cabin has its own private dining facilities and a library. And you'll also possibly be able to see here in this graphic that there is a ship's hospital, a sick bay, and there's also a spirit room, so sort of a wine cellar and liquor locker. The vessel was fitted out with modern contrivances such as lightning rods, which didn't exist on ships until then. It also had 22 chronometers and a mercury-free barometer that had recently been patented. To help ensure that he and his men did not suffer the sort of fates that Magellan's did, this vessel was fitted with a 6-pound boat carronade on a turntable on the forecastle, 2 brass 6-pound guns before the mainmast, and aft of it another 4 brass guns. Darwin had an additional 7 tons of sheathing added to the battle-ready hull, and this hull was strong enough so that they could take care of any below-the-waterline service wherever they could find a suitable beach. Fast forward nearly 100 years to the year 1912, which was the year that the Titanic had its unfortunate run-in with an iceberg in the North Atlantic. That same year, the Norwegians launched what is likely to have been the first Arctic expedition yacht. It was named Polaris. It was 144 feet. Again, for comparison, this is about the same size as Mercado, which is a Canadian-built expedition vessel that also went into the ice. So the Polaris did expedition charters and hunting party charters up into the ice, and it was built for that purpose very ruggedly. It had a 350 horsepower steam engine that delivered 10 knots, 10 luxury passenger cabins with electric lights. It had double framing and the hull was up to 30 inches thick. The bow was reinforced to a thickness of 52 inches. They carried 2 cooks on board and had a dining salon and a smoking room for the pleasure of the guests. At her launch, she was heralded as the strongest wooden ship ever built. In 1914, the Polaris was brought to England, renamed the Endurance, and enlisted as the lead vessel for Ernest Shackleton's 3rd Antarctic expedition. His objective was to cross the Antarctic from sea to sea via the pole. Some of the Arctic vessels designed during that time were bowl-bottomed, which meant that if the ice closed in against them, the ship would be squeezed up and out and not be the subject to the pressure of the ice compressing around her. The Endurance, on the other hand, was designed with inherent strength in her hull, in order to resist collision with ice floes and break through pack ice by ramming and crushing. She was not really intended to be frozen into the pack ice. After becoming entrapped, the Endurance was slowly crushed before any shore parties could come to their rescue. The crew escaped by camping on the sea ice until it disintegrated. And then they took to lifeboats to reach Elephant Island and then ultimately the South Georgia Island, which was 720 nautical miles away. Miraculously, they all survived and lessons were learned. And now we fast forward to the end of the 20th century when a generation of yachtsmen became explorers and expedition yachtsmen. And they did this by converting commercial vessels. And there's a series of commercial vessels that are legendary that were built in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s primarily. They're still in service today. You see them all around the world. They're highly sought after as charter vessels, and they hold their value very well in the brokerage market also. So part 2 of our series, we're going to look into this generation of yachtsmen as explorers and expedition yacht owners. So if that's of interest, please hit the button there for part 2 in our series of expedition versus white yachts.